The shuttle touched down on Zenithia Prime with barely a whisper. Jake Morrison looked out the window at the crystal towers rising from purple sand and shook his head. After 30 years in the diplomatic service, he still got nervous before big meetings. This one was bigger than most. "First time seeing a resort planet, sir?" Kate Williams asked from the seat beside him. The young lieutenant had been his aide for 2 years now, and she was good at reading his moods. "First time humanity gets to sit at the big table," Jake replied. "No pressure at all." The Galactic Trade Consortium had finally agreed to give humans provisional membership. It had taken 50 years of proving themselves, 50 years of showing they could build faster ships, solve problems other species couldn't, and fight when they had to. Now they were here on Zenithia Prime for the annual diplomatic gathering, and Jake knew one wrong word could ruin everything. Ryan Hayes. The military attach was checking his dress uniform in the reflection of the shuttle window. "Relax, Ambassador. We've fought off 3 different alien invasions. How hard can a dinner party be?" Kate laughed. "Famous last words, Captain." The shuttle doors opened, and they stepped out into air that smelled like cinnamon and ocean breeze. Zenithia Prime was built for diplomacy, with perfect weather, beautiful scenery, enough luxury to make even the most powerful species feel welcome. Representatives from dozens of worlds were already here, their various ships dotting the landing fields like exotic birds. A tall, pale figure in flowing robes approached them. His skin had a slight blue tint, and his eyes were completely black. Jake recognized him as a Zephyrian from the briefing materials. "Ambassador Morrison," the alien said in perfect English, "I am Advisor Kelleth. Her Royal Highness Princess Lyra Velthorn has requested that I escort you to your quarters." Jake tried not to show his surprise. The Zephyrian princess personally sending an escort was either a great honor or a very bad sign. With the Zephyrians, it was hard to tell the difference. They followed Kelleth through gardens filled with plants from 100 different worlds. Other diplomatic groups were scattered around, some Jake recognized from his briefings, others were completely alien to him. A group of insect-like beings clicked at each other in rapid conversation. Several reptilian creatures basked under heat lamps while reading data tablets. "The princess is looking forward to meeting humanity's representatives," Kelleth said as they walked. "She has heard many interesting stories about your species." "All good ones, I hope," Jake replied. "That depends on your definition of good," Kelleth said with what might have been a smile. "Your reputation for unpredictability precedes you." Their quarters were in a tower that seemed to be made entirely of some kind of transparent metal. The rooms were spacious and comfortable, with furniture that adjusted automatically to human proportions. Through the walls, they could see the ocean stretching to the horizon, its waves a soft green color under the alien sun. "The welcome ceremony begins in 2 hours," Kelleth informed them. "Traditional formal wear is expected." After he left, the 3 humans gathered in Jake's room to go over their strategy one more time. "Remember," Jake said, "we're here to observe and learn. Don't volunteer information unless asked directly. Whatever you do, don't insult anyone's customs or traditions." "What counts as an insult to these people?" Kate asked, pulling up files on her tablet. "I've been reading about Zephyrian culture, and they seem to have rules for everything." "Just follow my lead," Jake said. "When in doubt, say nothing and smile." Ryan was looking out at the ocean. "You know, for all our warnings about being careful, they invited us here. That has to mean something." "It means they're curious about us," Jake said. "Whether that's good or bad depends on what they find." The welcome ceremony was held in a massive hall with a dome ceiling that showed real-time views of space. Representatives from 47 different species were present, making it look like the galaxy's strangest cocktail party. Jake had studied photos of most of the major species, but seeing them in person was different. The Zephyrians were by far the most human-looking, though they were taller and moved with an almost liquid grace. Princess Lyra Velthorn was impossible to miss. She stood at the center of a group of Zephyrian nobles, wearing a dress that seemed to be made of starlight. Her hair was silver, her skin pale as moonlight, and her eyes were the deep purple of a nebula. She was beautiful in a way that made Jake understand why wars had been fought over Zephyrian royalty. "Now that is what I call a princess," Ryan whispered. "Keep your voice down," Jake hissed back. The ceremony began with formal introductions. Each species representative stood and gave a brief statement about their people and their hopes for the gathering. When Jake's turn came, he kept it simple. "Humanity is honored to be here," he said. "We come seeking friendship, trade, and understanding among all peoples of the galaxy." It was a safe, boring statement that couldn't possibly offend anyone. Or so he thought. After the formal presentations, the reception began. Jake found himself in conversation with a group of traders from the Outer Rim when he noticed Kate talking to several younger diplomats near the refreshment table. She was laughing at something one of them had said, and Jake felt a moment of worry. Kate was brilliant. She was also young and sometimes spoke before thinking. His worry proved justified when he heard her voice rise above the general conversation. Arranged marriages? Seriously. Seriously. We gave up that nonsense centuries ago. The whole idea is like a joke from the Dark Ages. The conversation around them died. Jake felt his stomach drop as he realized what had just happened. The group Kate was talking to included several young Zephyrians, and he could see the shock on their faces. One of them, a young male with intricate tattoos on his neck, stepped forward. "You consider arranged marriages to be a joke?" Kate, finally realizing she might have said something wrong, looked around nervously. "Well, I mean, humans believe people should choose their own partners. You know, for love?" The silence spread through the room like a wave. Jake started moving toward them, but he knew he was too late. The damage was done. "You mock our most sacred traditions," the tattooed Zephyrian said, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet hall. "The union of noble houses has been the foundation of our civilization for 2,000 years. Ryan, trying to help, stepped up beside Kate. "Hey, nobody meant any offense. We're just different species with different customs, where humans come from. We figure love should be as free as the stars themselves." If Kate's comment had been bad, Ryan's was worse. Several Zephyrians actually gasped. Jake could see Princess Lyra watching from across the room, her purple eyes focused intently on the unfolding disaster. "Free as the stars," another Zephyrian noble demanded. "You reduce the sacred bonds of marriage to mere casual attraction?" "That's not what we meant," Jake said, finally reaching them. "My colleagues were simply explaining human customs, not criticizing yours, but the damage was spreading." Other species were watching with interest, some looking amused, others concerned. The Zephyrian delegation was clustering together, their faces showing degrees of shock and anger. Chancellor Theron Blackstar, head of the Zephyrian delegation, approached with measured steps. He was older than the others, with silver hair and eyes like cold stars. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Ambassador Morrison," he said formally, "it seems your people have very strong opinions about our way of life." "Chancellor Blackstar," Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady, "please allow me to apologize for any misunderstanding. My staff was simply sharing information about human customs, not making judgments about anyone else's." "Misunderstanding?" Blackstar's voice was ice. "Your aide called our most sacred institution a joke. Your military officer suggested our carefully planned unions are inferior to random animal attraction. What exactly did we misunderstand?" Jake felt the weight of humanity's future in the consortium hanging in the balance. One careless comment had turned what should have been a routine diplomatic function into a potential disaster. Perhaps came a new voice. "We should seek to understand each other better." Everyone turned to see Princess Lyra approaching. She moved with the grace of a dancer, but her eyes held an intelligence that made Jake think of a scientist studying an interesting specimen. "Your Highness," Blackstar said, bowing slightly. "These humans have insulted our most cherished traditions, have they?" Lyra asked, her purple eyes fixed on Jake. "Or have they simply revealed how little we know about each other?" She looked around the room, taking in the watching faces. "I find myself curious about these human customs. Perhaps we should learn more before we judge." She turned to Jake directly. "Ambassador Morrison, would you and your delegation be willing to meet with me privately? I believe a cultural exchange might prevent further misunderstandings." Jake knew an opportunity when he saw one. "He would be honored, Your Highness." As the formal reception resumed around them, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just happened. What had started as a diplomatic disaster might have turned into something else entirely. The next morning brought a message that Jake Morrison had been both hoping for and dreading. Princess Lyra requested a private meeting with the human delegation at the Botanical Gardens in 2 hours. The location was neutral ground, away from the formal conference areas where every word was recorded and analyzed. Jake found himself pacing his room, while Kate and Ryan prepared for the meeting. The young lieutenant had barely slept, clearly worried about her comments the night before. Ryan was his usual calm self, but Jake could see the tension in his shoulders. "Remember," Jake said as they prepared to leave, "this is damage control. We apologize. We learn about their customs, and we try to save our membership in the consortium." The Botanical Gardens were a wonder of galactic engineering. Plants from hundreds of worlds grew together in carefully controlled environments. Air shimmered with different atmospheric conditions, creating pockets where various species could breathe comfortably. Jake had never seen anything like it. They found Princess Lyra sitting beside a pond filled with floating flowers that glowed soft blue in the alien sunlight. She was alone, which surprised Jake. Zephyrian royalty usually traveled with large entourages of guards and advisors. "Ambassador Morrison," she said, rising gracefully. "Thank you for coming, Your Highness," Jake replied, giving what he hoped was an appropriate bow. "We appreciate this opportunity to clear up last night's misunderstanding." "Please sit," Lyra said, gesturing to benches arranged around the pond. "And there is no need for such formality. I asked to meet you away from the official proceedings for a reason." As they settled onto the benches, Jake noticed something different about the princess. Away from the formal reception, she seemed more relaxed, more human. Her purple eyes held curiosity rather than the cold calculation he had expected. "I must admit," Lyra began, "your comments last night were quite shocking to my people. But they were also fascinating." Kate shifted uncomfortably. "Your Highness, I want to apologize. I didn't mean to insult your traditions. I was just explaining how things work for humans." "And how do things work for humans?" Lyra asked, leaning forward slightly. "This concept of choosing your own partner for love rather than political alliance is completely foreign to us." Jake exchanged glances with his team. This wasn't going the way he had expected. The princess seemed genuinely curious rather than offended. "Well," Ryan said carefully, "humans believe that marriage should be based on mutual affection and compatibility. We think people are happier when they choose their own partners." "Happier," Lyra repeated, as if testing the word. "This is more important than strengthening alliances between families or combining resources." "For humans, yes," Jake said. "We believe personal happiness leads to stronger relationships, which actually makes for better partnerships in the long run." Lyra was quiet for a moment, watching the glowing flowers drift across the pond. "Tell me about this process. How do humans find these partners?" Kate, encouraged by the princess's interest, began to explain. "We call it dating. People spend time together, get to know each other, see if they're compatible. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, but the choice is always theirs, and your families have no say in this." "They can give advice," Ryan said, "but ultimately, it's the individual's decision. We figure you're the one who has to live with the person, so you should be the one who chooses." Lyra nodded slowly. "This is why you found our arranged marriages so strange. You cannot imagine being told who to marry. It's not that we think." "It's wrong," Jake said quickly. "Different species have different customs. We just don't understand how it works." "Perhaps I could help you understand," Lyra said. "My own marriage was arranged when I was 12 years old. I've never met my intended husband, Prince Darius of the Outer Territories. Our union will combine two of the most powerful Zephyrian houses and strengthen our empire's hold on 3 star systems." "But what about what you want?" Kate asked, before she could stop herself. Lyra looked at her with something that might have been surprise. "What I want has never been part of the equation. I am a princess. My duty is to my people, not to my personal desires." "That sounds lonely," Ryan said quietly. "Lonely," Lyra repeated, the same way she had said happier earlier. "I had never thought of it that way." Jake realized they were moving into dangerous territory. The princess was asking questions that challenged the foundation of her society. But her interest seemed genuine, and refusing to answer might be seen as an insult. "Your Highness," he said carefully, "perhaps we could arrange for you to observe some human customs during your stay here? Not to change anything, just to understand our perspective better." "I would like that very much," Lyra said. "But it would have to be unofficial. My advisors would not approve of such activities." Over the next few days, what had started as diplomatic damage control became something unexpected. Princess Lyra began spending time with the human delegation, always under the pretense of cultural exchange. She introduced herself to others as Lyra Veith, a junior diplomat studying human customs. The disguise was thin, but in the diverse environment of Zenithia Prime, it was enough. Jake found himself fascinated by the princess's quick intelligence and genuine curiosity. She asked questions about everything from human government to their eating habits, always with the intensity of a scientist studying a new species. But it was Dr. Alex Chen who really captured her attention. Jake had forgotten that Alex was even part of their delegation. The xenobiologist was supposed to be documenting the various species at the gathering for Earth's scientific databases. He was quiet, thoughtful, and treated everyone with the same respectful interest, regardless of their species or status. "Dr. Chen," Lyra said one afternoon as they sat in a cafe overlooking the ocean, "your work involves studying how different species adapt to their environments, correct?" "That's right," Alex replied. "I'm particularly interested in how social structures evolve in response to environmental pressures." "And what have you observed about human social structures?" Alex considered the question seriously. "Humans are remarkably adaptable. We've developed social systems that prioritize individual choice within group cooperation. It's actually quite efficient from an evolutionary standpoint." "How so?" "Well, when individuals are free to make their own choices about partners, careers, and life paths, they tend to be more motivated and creative. It benefits the entire group. Forced compliance might create short-term stability, but it often leads to stagnation." Jake watched as Lyra absorbed this information. She was learning to think about her own society in ways that were clearly new to her. "But surely there must be some structure," she said. "Some guidance for young people who don't know what they want." "Of course," Alex said. "We have education systems, mentorship programs, family advice. But ultimately, we trust people to make their own decisions. Even if they make mistakes, we believe the freedom to choose is worth the risk." "The freedom to choose?" Lyra murmured. "Even if it means choosing poorly?" "Especially then," Alex said with a smile. "How else do you learn?" Jake noticed that these conversations were becoming more personal as the days went by. Lyra asked about Alex's own life, his choice to become a scientist, his decision to leave Earth for the frontier worlds. Alex, in turn, was clearly intrigued by her intelligence and her unique perspective on galactic politics. The problem was that the official diplomatic situation was getting worse. Chancellor Blackstar and the Zephyrian delegation were growing. Increasingly frustrated with what they saw as human arrogance, they demanded formal apologies and assurances that humanity would respect established galactic customs. Jake tried to manage both situations, but it was becoming clear that something would have to give. The princess's unofficial cultural education was becoming more important to her than her official duties, and people were starting to notice. Ambassador Kate said one evening, as they watched Lyra and Alex discussing the evolution of democratic systems, "I think we might have a bigger problem than diplomatic protocol." "What do you mean?" Kate said, nodding toward the pair. "When was the last time you saw two people so completely absorbed in each other's company?" Jake looked more carefully. Alex was explaining something with animated gestures, and Lyra was listening with the kind of focused attention that suggested she cared more about the speaker than the subject. There was something in the way they looked at each other that made Jake's stomach tighten. "They're just friends," he said, but even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. "Are they?" Ryan asked, joining the conversation. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like the heir to the Zephyrian throne is falling for our xenobiologist." "That's impossible," Jake said. "She's engaged to be married. She's royalty. She barely knows him." Tell that to them, Kate said quietly. Jake watched as Alex said something that made Lyra laugh. It was a genuine laugh, full of joy and spontaneity. He had never seen her laugh like that during any of the formal diplomatic functions. This could be a disaster, he said. Or it could be exactly what we need, Kate replied. Think about it, Ambassador. If the princess is genuinely interested in human customs, maybe she can help bridge the gap between our species. The truth came out in the worst possible way. Jake Morrison had been dreading this moment for days, but when it finally happened, it was even more dramatic than he had feared. The evening had started normally enough. Princess Lyra, still using her false identity as a junior diplomat, had joined Alex Chen for dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking the crystal formations that made Zenithia Prime famous. They had been discussing the social implications of technological advancement when the conversation took a more personal turn. Alex, Lyra said, her purple eyes reflecting the soft light from the floating lanterns. Can I ask you something about human customs? Of course, Alex replied, setting down his fork. Over the past week, he had grown comfortable with her questions, even looking forward to them. When humans choose their partners, how do they know? How do they recognize love? Paused, suddenly aware that this wasn't just academic curiosity. Well, it's different for everyone. But generally, it's a combination of things. You enjoy spending time with the person. You think about them when they're not around. You want to share your thoughts and experiences with them, and you trust them, Lyra added quietly. You feel safe being yourself around them. Yes, Alex said, looking at her more carefully. That's exactly right. I think, Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper, I think I'm beginning to understand. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of a tall figure in the distinctive silver armor of the Zephorian Royal Guard. The warrior's face was hidden behind a ceremonial mask, but his urgency was clear. Princess Lyra, he said in rapid Zephyrian, you must return to your quarters immediately. Chancellor is demanding your presence. Alex stared in shock as the words sank in. Princess? Lyra closed her eyes, her face showing a mixture of shame and desperation. I can explain. You're the princess, Alex said, his voice flat. The real princess. The one who's engaged to be married. Alex, please. The one whose engagement we insulted at the reception, Alex continued, standing up from the table. The one whose marriage alliance we called a joke. Other diners were starting to notice the commotion. The Royal Guard was speaking urgently into a communication device, clearly calling for backup. I never meant to lie to you, Lyra said. Also, standing, I just wanted to know what it was like to be treated as myself, not as a title. And I was your experiment, Alex said bitterly.
Oh, you're a chance to see how the primitive humans behave.
No. Lyra's voice carried across the restaurant. It wasn't like that. What I feel for you is real. The words hung in the air like a confession. Alex's expression shifted from anger to confusion to something that might have been hope. But before he could respond, more guards arrived. Princess Lyra Velthorn, the lead guard, announced in English, clearly intending everyone to hear. By order of Chancellor Blackstar, you are to return to the Zephyrian delegation immediately.
The restaurant
fell silent. Everyone now knew exactly who they were looking at. The heir to the Zephyrian throne, the most powerful princess in the galaxy, caught having an intimate dinner with a human scientist. Jake Morrison arrived minutes later, having been alerted by the diplomatic security network. He found Alex standing alone beside the table while Lyra argued with the guards in rapid Zephyrian. Other delegates from various species were gathering, drawn by the commotion. Dr. Chen, Jake said quietly, we need to go, now. She lied to me, Alex said, still staring at Lyra. For over a week, she lied to me. She's royalty, Jake replied. Lying to commoners is probably considered a minor social skill, but even as he said it, Jake could see that wasn't fair. He had watched Lyra over the past week, seen her genuine curiosity and growing happiness. Her deception hadn't been malicious. The argument between Lyra and the guards was escalating. Jake couldn't understand all the words, but the tone was clear. The guards were insisting she return with them immediately. Lyra was refusing. I will not go, she said finally in English. her voice carrying clearly across the restaurant. "I am of age, and I choose to remain here, Your Highness," the lead guard said, his voice strained. "Please do not make this more difficult than necessary? More difficult?" Lyra turned to face the gathering crowd. "I've spent my entire life being told what to do, who to marry, how to think. For the first time, I have found someone who sees me as a person, not a political tool. I will not give that up." The crowd was growing larger. Jake could see representatives from dozens of species, all watching the drama unfold. This was exactly the kind of public spectacle that could destroy careers and start wars. "Princess He said, stepping forward. "Perhaps we could discuss this privately," Lyra said, her eyes fixed on Alex. "I'm tired of private discussions and secret meetings. I want to make a public statement." Chancellor Blackstar arrived then, his face a mask of cold fury. Behind him came a full diplomatic entourage, including several species ambassadors who had clearly been pulled from their evening activities. "Princess Lyra," Blackstar said, his voice carrying the authority of centuries of noble breeding, "you will return to your quarters immediately. This embarrassment has gone far enough." "Will not," Lyra replied, moving to stand beside Alex. "I formally request asylum with the human delegation." The words hit like a physical blow. Jake felt his knees go weak. Around them, the crowd exploded into shocked murmurs and rapid conversations in a dozen languages. "Asylum?" Blackstar's voice was deadly quiet. "You would abandon your people, your responsibilities, your very identity for this alien." "I would choose my own life," Lyra said, taking Alex's hand. "I would choose love over duty, happiness over obligation." Alex squeezed her hand but didn't speak. Jake could see the conflict in the young scientist's face. He was clearly affected by Lyra's declaration, but he was also intelligent enough to understand the implications. "Your Highness," Jake said carefully, "asylum is a very serious matter. Perhaps we should discuss the ramifications privately before making any final decisions." "There is nothing to discuss," Blackstar said. "The princess is clearly not thinking rationally. She has been corrupted by human ideology and needs to be removed from this influence immediately." "I am thinking more clearly than I have in my entire life," Lyra replied. "For the first time, I understand what it means to make a choice based on what I want rather than what others expect." The crowd was pressing closer now, drawn by the drama. Jake could see news drones hovering overhead, recording everything. This was going to be broadcast across the galaxy within hours. "Princess," he said, "if you truly want asylum, we need to follow proper procedures. This isn't the place for such discussions." "Where is the place?" Lyra asked. "Meeting where powerful men decide my fate without consulting me? I'm tired of being treated like property to be traded between houses." "You are not property," Blackstar said, his voice rising. "You are the heir to the Zephyrian throne.
Ow.
You have responsibilities to billions of beings across dozens of star systems." "Responsibilities I never chose," Lyra replied. "Responsibilities that were assigned to me based on an accident of birth." "This is what comes of exposing her to human barbarity," Blackstar said, turning to Jake. "Your people have poisoned her mind with their primitive concepts of individual choice over collective duty." "Hey," Ryan Hayes said, stepping forward. "Hadn't even noticed the captain arrive. Nobody poisoned anybody's mind. We just treated her like a person instead of a political symbol." "A person?" Blackstar's laugh was cold. "She is a princess of the Zephyrian Empire. She is no more a mere person than you are a mere animal." "That's exactly the problem," Alex said, speaking for the first time since the revelation. "You don't see her as a person. You see her as a tool, a means to an end." "And what do you see her as? Human?" Blackstar asked. Alex looked at Lyra, his face showing a mixture of emotions. "I see her as someone who's incredibly intelligent, curious about the universe, and brave enough to question everything she's been taught. I see someone who deserves to make her own choices about her life, even if those choices destroy the stability of an empire that has existed for 2,000 years. Even then," Alex said firmly, "no one else has the right to make those choices. For her, Blackstar turned to the crowd, his voice carrying to every corner of the restaurant. You see, this is what human influence brings. Chaos, selfishness, the destruction of order and tradition. Maybe some traditions need to be destroyed, Kate Williams said, appearing beside Jake. Maybe some order is actually oppression. Situation was spiraling out of control. Jake could see that this was no longer just about diplomatic protocol. Lines were being drawn between those who believed in individual rights and those who prioritized social stability. Princess Lyra, he said, I need to ask you directly. Are you formally requesting asylum with the human delegation? Lyra looked around at the crowd, at the cameras, at the faces of beings from across the galaxy. Then she looked at Alex, who squeezed her hand encouragingly. Yes, she said clearly. I, Princess Lyra Velthorn, heir to the Zephyrian throne, formally request political asylum with the human delegation. I renounce my engagement to Prince Darius and my claim to the throne. I choose to live as a free individual rather than as a political tool. The next 6 weeks were the most stressful of Jake Morrison's diplomatic career. Princess Lyra's asylum request had turned Zenithia Prime into a battlefield of words. Lawyers and political pressure that seemed to increase daily, but nothing had prepared him for the news that Dr. Alex Chen delivered on a quiet Tuesday morning. She's pregnant, Alex said, his face pale as he sat across from Jake in the secure conference room they had been using for their daily crisis meetings. Jake stared at him for a long moment, hoping he had misheard. Pregnant. About 6 weeks along, Alex confirmed. She just told me this morning. She's been feeling sick, and the medical scan confirmed it. Kate Williams, who had been reviewing legal documents, dropped her tablet. Oh my God, this changes everything, Ryan Hayes said from his position by the window. This isn't just about asylum anymore. Jake put his head in his hands. The situation had been complicated enough when it was just about a princess choosing love over duty. Now they were dealing with a pregnant heir to the Zephyrian throne, carrying a half-human child. Have you told her about the implications? Jake asked. What implications? Alex asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. Alex, Kate said. Gently, she's the heir to the throne. That baby could potentially inherit the Zephyrian Empire? A half-human baby, Ryan added. I'm guessing their laws don't have a lot to say about that. Alex was quiet for a moment, processing the information. She mentioned that Zephyrian royal bloodlines are considered sacred. Mixing with other species has never happened before in their ruling family. Which means we're in completely uncharted territory, Jake said. Not just diplomatically, but legally and constitutionally. The pregnancy news came at the worst possible time. The past 6 weeks had seen a steady escalation. In tensions between the human delegation and the Zephyrian Empire, Chancellor Blackstar had demanded Lyra's immediate return, claiming that her asylum request was invalid because she had been mentally compromised by human influence. The Galactic Trade Consortium had been forced to convene emergency sessions to address the crisis. Some species supported Lyra's right to choose her own path, viewing it as a matter of individual freedom. Others sided with the Zephyrians, arguing that royal bloodlines came with responsibilities that couldn't be abandoned. On a whim, Jake had spent countless hours on encrypted communications with Earth's government, trying to explain how a simple, diplomatic gathering had turned into a potential interstellar war. The politicians back home were divided between those who wanted to support the princess and those who thought humanity should distance itself from the whole mess. We need to tell her about the bigger picture, Jake said finally. She needs to understand what this pregnancy means for galactic politics. She already knows some of it, Alex said. She's been researching Zephyrian succession laws with some of the legal experts here. Apparently there's no clear precedent for what happens when the heir produces a mixed-species child. What did she find? The laws are contradictory. Some ancient texts suggest that any child of royal blood can inherit regardless of species. Others require pure Zephyrian lineage. And some middle sections suggest that the High Council has the authority to determine legitimacy case by case. Kate was making notes on her tablet, so basically, it depends on who's interpreting the law and what political agenda they have. Exactly, Alex said. And right now, the High Council is dominated by Blackstar's faction. She wants to remove Lyra from the succession entirely. What does Lyra want to do? Jake asked. Alex was quiet for a moment. She wants to keep the baby. She says it represents everything she's fighting for, the right to choose her own life, her own love, her own future. Even if it means civil war in the Zephyrian Empire, she thinks it might be worth it. She says there are other Zephyrians who are tired of the old ways, tired of arranged marriages and strict social hierarchies. She believes this could be the catalyst for change. Ryan turned from the window. Or it could be the catalyst for the Empire's complete collapse. Either way, we're going to be blamed for it. Jake stood up and began pacing. We need to think strategically. If we continue to harbor Lyra, we're essentially declaring that we support her claim to the throne and her child's potential inheritance. That's going to make us enemies of anyone who supports the traditional power structure. But if we abandon her now, Kate said, we're basically saying that individual rights don't matter when they're inconvenient for politics. That goes against everything humans claim to believe in. Plus, Alex added quietly, I love her. And she loves me. This isn't just politics anymore. Jake looked at the young scientist with sympathy. Alex had never asked to be at the center of a galactic crisis. He had just fallen in love with a woman who happened to be the most politically important person in one of the galaxy's major empires. Alex, he said gently, I need you to understand something. That baby you're about to have could potentially rule over billions of beings across dozens of star systems. Are you prepared for that responsibility? I'm not sure anyone could be prepared for that, Alex replied. But I'm prepared to be a father and to support Lyra in whatever decisions she makes. Even if those decisions tear apart the galaxy, even then. Jake's communication device buzzed with an urgent message. He read it quickly, his face growing grim. What is it? Kate asked. Message from Chancellor Blackstar. It's calling for an emergency session of the Galactic Trade Consortium.
Wants
to present evidence that Lyra is mentally unfit to make decisions about her own life. What kind of evidence? Medical records showing the pregnancy? He's arguing that the hormonal changes associated with pregnancy, combined with human psychological manipulation, have rendered her incapable of rational thought. Alex stood up angrily. That's ridiculous. She's more clear-headed now than she's ever been. Ridiculous or not, it might work, Ryan said. A lot of species have very traditional views about pregnancy and female decision-making capability. There's more, Jake continued reading. He's also demanding that we surrender Lyra for immediate return to Zephyrian space for what he calls proper medical care and psychological rehabilitation. They want to take her back and force her to marry Prince Darius, Kate said. Probably. Hide the pregnancy or find some way to get rid of it. Over my dead body, Alex said. It might come to that, Jake replied grimly. Blackstar has also announced that if we don't comply within 48 hours, the Zephyrian Empire will consider it an act of war and respond accordingly. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They were talking about a potential military conflict between humanity and one of the galaxy's most powerful empires.
Ew.
All because of one woman's choice to follow her heart instead of her duty. There's something else, Jake continued. I've been getting reports from our intelligence sources. Apparently, this situation has been causing upheaval within the Zephyrian Empire itself. There are factions that support Lyra's right to choose. Led by some of the younger nobles who have been questioning the arranged marriage system for years. Who's leading them? Kate asked. A cousin of Lyra's, Prince Kale, Velthorn. He's been arguing that the Empire needs to modernize its social structures to remain competitive with other galactic powers and the opposition. Old Guard, who see this as a threat to everything their civilization stands for. They're afraid that if Lyra gets away with choosing her own path, it will inspire others to do the same. Alex sat back down, looking overwhelmed. So we're not just dealing with Lyra's personal choice anymore? We're dealing with a civil war brewing in the Zephyrian Empire. A civil war that could spread to other species, Ryan added. There are probably young nobles and commoners in dozens of civilizations who are watching this situation and wondering why they can't make their own choices too? Jake nodded. The consortium is terrified that this could trigger a wave of social upheaval across the galaxy. Traditional power structures everywhere are feeling threatened. Good, Kate said firmly. Maybe it's time for some of those power structures to be challenged. Maybe, Jake replied. But are we prepared for the consequences? Are we ready to be responsible for reshaping galactic civilization? I don't think we have a choice anymore, Alex said. The moment Lyra asked for asylum, we crossed a line.
Dow.
We have to see it through. Jake looked around the room at his small team, a career diplomat, a young aide, a military officer, and a scientist who had accidentally fallen in love with a princess. They were about to make decisions that could affect the entire galaxy. All right, he said finally. We support Lyra, we protect her and the baby, and we prepare for whatever comes next. Even if it means war, Ryan asked. Even if it means war. Sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when the odds are impossible. As they began planning their next moves, Jake couldn't help but think about how strange it was that a simple joke about arranged marriages had led them to this moment. But maybe that's how real change always happened. Not through grand political movements, but through individual people making brave choices about their own lives. The question now was whether those individual choices would create a better galaxy, or tear the existing one apart. Either way, there was no going back. The solution came from the most unexpected source. Prince Cale Velthorn arrived on Zenithia Prime 3 days before Chancellor Blackstar's ultimatum expired, bringing with him a small group of Zephyrian scholars and something that would change everything. A collection of ancient texts that had been hidden in the Imperial archives for over 1,000 years. Jake Morrison watched through the conference room's window as the prince's ship landed. Cale was younger than he had expected, perhaps only a few years older than Princess Lyra, with the same silver hair and purple eyes, but a more relaxed bearing that reminded Jake of his cousin. He's taking a huge risk coming here, Kate Williams observed Blackstar. We'll consider this treason. Maybe that's the point, Ryan Hayes replied. Sometimes you have to choose sides. When Prince Cale entered the human delegation's quarters an hour later, he was accompanied by Princess Lyra and Alex Chen. The family resemblance between the cousins was strong. But where Lyra had learned to mask her emotions behind royal training, Cale wore his feelings openly. Ambassador Morrison, Cale said, offering a formal bow. Thank you for protecting my cousin during this difficult time, Your Highness, Jake replied. I have to say your timing is interesting, Cale smiled. I prefer to think of it as perfect. I bring news that will change how this entire situation is viewed. He gestured to one of the scholars, an elderly Zephyrian woman with intricate tattoos covering her arms. She placed a collection of crystalline data storage devices on the conference table. These are the lost chronicles of Empress Vitha, the bold, the scholar said. They were sealed away during the Great Consolidation because they challenged the version of history that the noble houses preferred. What do they say? Lyra asked, moving closer to the table. They tell the true story of the Zephyrian Empire's greatest period of expansion, Cale explained. Empress Vitha ruled over 2,000 years ago, during what our current histories call the Golden Age, but they leave out a crucial detail about why that age was so golden. The scholar activated one of the crystal devices, and holographic text appeared in the air above the table. Jake couldn't read the ancient Zephyrian script, but he could see the intensity in Lyra's eyes as she studied it. The Empress took lovers from dozens of different species, Lyra said, her voice filled with wonder. She had children with beings from across the galaxy, and those children, Cale continued, became some of the most successful leaders. Artists, scientists, and diplomats in Zephyrian history. The mixing of different peoples, different ways of thinking, different genetic advantages, it made the Empire stronger, not weaker. Alex leaned forward. What happened to change that? Politics, the elderly scholar said with disgust. Empress Vitha's death, the noble houses fought for control. They decided that purity was easier to maintain than excellence. They rewrote the histories, destroyed most of the evidence, and created the myth that Zephyrian superiority came from keeping the bloodlines separate. But they kept the original records, Cale said, hidden away in case they were ever needed. Again, well, they're needed now. Jake felt a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. This changes the legal situation completely. More than that, Lyra said, still reading the holographic texts. Look at this passage about succession laws. It says that the heir's children, regardless of species, inherit not just the right to rule, but the responsibility to bring new strength to the empire through diversity. Your baby, Kate said to Alex and Lyra, isn't a constitutional crisis. According to these laws, she or he is exactly what the empire needs. She, Lyra said with a small smile. Found out yesterday. We're having a daughter. Alex squeezed her hand. Alina, we've decided to name her Alina Velthornchen, Alina Kale repeated. The name means bringer of light in ancient Zephyrian. How appropriate. Jake's communication device buzzed with an urgent message. He read it quickly, then looked up with a grim expression. Blackstar has called for an emergency session of the Galactic Trade Consortium. He wants to present his evidence that Lyra is mentally unfit and demand her immediate return. Perfect timing, Kale said. We'll present our evidence at the same session. The emergency session was held in the Great Assembly Hall of Zenithia Prime. Representatives from 47 different species filled the circular chamber, with the humans and Zephyrians facing each other across the central speaking area. The tension in the room was so thick Jake could practically taste it. Chancellor Blackstar presented his case first, arguing that Princess Lyra had been psychologically manipulated by human ideology and that her pregnancy proved she was not thinking. Clearly, he demanded her immediate return for medical treatment and psychological rehabilitation. The heir to the Zephyrian throne, Blackstar declared, cannot be allowed to disgrace herself and her people with this unnatural union. The sanctity of our bloodlines must be preserved. When it was the humans' turn to respond, Jake stood to speak. But before he could say a word, Princess Lyra rose from her seat. I will speak for myself, she announced, her voice carrying clearly. Throughout the chamber, she walked to the center of the speaking area, her pregnancy now visible beneath her flowing robes. When she spoke, her voice was calm but filled with conviction. Chancellor Blackstar calls my love for Dr. Chen unnatural, she said. He claims that carrying a mixed-species child disgraces our bloodlines. But I have discovered something that changes everything we think we know about Zephyrian history. Prince Kale joined her in the speaking area, carrying the crystal devices. As the ancient texts appeared in holographic form above their heads, translated into the common galactic language, a murmur of surprise rippled through the assembly. These are the lost chronicles of Empress Vitha the Bold, Lyra continued. They prove that the greatest period in Zephyrian history was built on exactly the kind of diversity that Chancellor Blackstar now condemns. She gestured to the floating text. Our empire was strongest when it embraced different peoples, different ideas, different ways of thinking. The rigid purity that has dominated our recent history is not traditional. It's a corruption of our true heritage. Blackstar stood angrily. These texts are fabrications, designed to justify this disgraceful behavior. They bear the imperial seal, Kale replied calmly. They've been authenticated by the Empire's own scholars. You cannot dispute their legitimacy. Without disputing the legitimacy of our entire historical archive, the debate that followed lasted for hours.
Ow.
Representatives from dozens of species spoke about individual rights, cultural traditions, and the balance between personal freedom and social responsibility. Some supported the princess, others supported Blackstar, but Jake could see that the momentum was shifting. The turning point came when an elderly representative from the Altarian collective stood to speak. The Altarians were known for their strict adherence to tradition and social hierarchy. We have listened to arguments about law and custom, she said. But there is something more important at stake here. We are witnessing the birth of something new, not just a child, but a new way of thinking about what it means to be part of a galactic community. She looked directly at Lyra. Princess Lyra could have chosen the easy path. She could have accepted her arranged marriage and lived a comfortable but constrained life. Instead, she chose to risk everything for the right to determine her own destiny. That kind of courage should be celebrated, not punished. The final vote was closer than Jake had hoped, but decisive enough to matter. 31 species voted to recognize Princess Lyra's right to asylum and self-determination. 16 voted to support the Zephyrian demand for her return. But the real victory came 3 days later. When news arrived from the Zephyrian home system, Prince Kale's revelation of the Lost Chronicles had triggered massive demonstrations across the empire. Young Zephyrians, inspired by their princess's courage, were demanding the right to choose their own marriages, careers, and life paths. The Zephyrian High Council, faced with potential civil unrest, agreed to a compromise. Princess Lyra would retain her royal status and succession rights, but the empire would begin a gradual process of social reform, allowing more individual choice within the traditional structure. 6 months later, Jake Morrison stood in the medical center on Zenithia Prime, watching through a window as Alex Chen held his newborn daughter. Alina Velthornchun was tiny and perfect. With her mother's purple eyes and her father's curious expression, Princess Lyra, exhausted but radiant, looked up as Jake entered the room. "How does it feel to have changed galactic history?" he asked. "Like the beginning, rather than the end," she replied. Lena represents something new, a generation that will grow up believing they can choose their own paths, regardless of what species they are or what families they come from. Alex looked up from his daughter. "We've been talking about establishing an institute for cross-cultural studies, a place where beings from different species can learn about each other without political pressure. And Alina will grow up there," Lyra added, learning that diversity isn't something to fear but something to celebrate. Jake smiled as he watched the little family.